Hello and welcome to Shadow Jackson Live. I'm here with Gothics. How are you, Gothics?
I'm fabulous, and I was muted. Thank you for inviting me.
Gothics is fabulous. And my good friend from Michigan, Mr. Chuck Littleton. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for inviting me to come crash the party.
It's all good. I promised Gothics that it's not a bait and switch. He's friendly, and in fact, I think you guys would enjoy each other's company. Both of y'all are very brilliant people, and so I'm glad to have you guys on. So Gothics is in a new film that is going to be released soon. Tell us a little bit about that, please, Gothics.
Yeah, so the film is a documentary about myself, specifically, I guess, my political awakening, me coming to the realization that everything I was fed to believe about being Black in America was false, and just going through that process. And I think it's a story that a lot of people, I know a lot of people in America can resonate with. And so it just goes through my entire journey of just like recognizing that, and then just all the trials I went through to get to where I am now, where I'm not afraid of voicing an opinion that contradicts the prescribed Black narrative, if you will.
Right. And Chuck, feel free to chime in at any given time. So I had the honor of seeing, I guess, the early draft of the film, and I was blown away by what I saw. Not only because of the subject matter, but also because this was Graham's first feature-length film, and I was just blown away of how well it was made. When it came to him approaching you and saying, "Hey, I want to make a documentary about you," did you ask him for like his credentials? Did you ask him, to see a portfolio of sorts? What I guess gave you the confidence to say, yeah, let's do this?
Yeah, so initially when he had reached out to me, I actually ignored him. Like, he sent me an email and he's like, "Hey, I'm a filmmaker," and I was like, this is weird, because that's at the moment my videos were really taking off on YouTube. And I was attracting a lot of attention, and to me, I'm like, this is some weirdo that just wants to, make money off of my trauma. And then bizarre. So I had actually ignored him for a little bit, but he was very persistent, and eventually I forgot how I came to agree to having a conversation with him, but eventually I agreed to that, and he sent me some of his past films that he did, which were just short films, like 5 to 10 minutes long. And I'm like, okay, so he actually knows how to use a camera, so he's not entirely weird. That's pretty much how it came to be.
I noticed that there's a pretty big kind of influx of people moving to where does he live again?
Idaho.
Moscow, right?
Yeah.
Will you be joining the ranks of those who are moving to Moscow?
Bruh, he keeps bringing that up. He's like, we keep praying for it, but whatever God decides. But I mean, we love it there whenever we've visited. It's just such a culture shock. Everyone is so friendly and nice, and they're smiling. And you come back to Rhode Island, everyone got this stank look on their face. Like,
So I did want to ask you, so what I'm most excited about is from the time the film started to this very moment, you have went through a transition of sorts. You were born again. And so, I was telling Graham that I think it's huge that I guess transition was captured. How many of us have the luxury of having our kind of being born again or coming to know Christ captured in that way? What are you hoping that people get from the film?
I think my biggest hope is that people will realize that it is okay to change your mind on things, whether it's political, spirituality, whatever it may be. I think our culture has convinced a generation of people that no, what you believe, you can never change your mind. And if people ridicule you for it, then that must mean that you're in the wrong. And that's stupid. So I'm hoping it, at minimum, gets people to think about like, that's something I didn't consider before. And also give people in some way courage to say, you know what, I'm going to pursue this thing because it's something that I believe to be true.
So what are some of the biggest things that you've learned, I guess, over the past 2 years?
Oh, yeah. So past 2 years, I think the biggest one, and it ties into, me being born again, is the realization that if you're not following a moral arbiter, being God, then nothing else matters. And this goes for the left and the right. So when you see people arguing about political issues and this is wrong and none of that matters, and it's all based in human opinion if you don't have a moral arbiter to set the standards for what is okay. And so that's something that I have been trying to ease in with my content to get people to at least consider that, because I look at it from the perspective of, okay, you guys can march and protest and do all this political action, but again, if you don't have that guideline, you're sort of just basing your motives on just your opinion, and all laws are imposed morality. So even if you're an atheist, your morality is going to be imposed on people. So the question is, whose morality is the right one? And the right one comes from God.
That leads to something I wanted to share with you and get your opinion on. But Chuck, did you have anything you wanted to add or ask Gothics?
No, Gothics. I was just curious to know, sort of like, so what came first? What came first? Was it your political wheels started to turn first, and then that kind of led you to this realization or the revelation, so to speak, or was it the opposite? Was it the spiritual part that came into play first? I'm just curious.
No, that's a good question. It was the political journey, and it was me going down the rabbit hole of researching communism. And very early on, before the gospel was even shared to me, I kept finding this common trend in all the historical documents and videos I was researching on this topic. And that trend was, wow, communists really hate Christians. I wonder why. I just started connecting the dots. And that black pilled me to like the point I was so depressed. So the spirituality came as like a solution to me being so miserable reading all of this stuff that I was like, oh, there's no hope here. And so God gave me that hope after the fact.
Gotcha. I gotcha.
So what's the difference? And I've been accused of being black pilled. I'm not really sure what that means entirely. What's the difference between a black pill, red pill, white pill? Educate me on that.
Yeah. So the red pill is, okay, you see the government corruption. It's like, oh, okay, everything that you think is true about politics, it's not really what it is. That's just the surface level. You got to go deep. Black pill is you go deep, and now you're like, oh, like you start panicking. You're like, I don't know how we're gonna fix this, and you just become like entrenched in a state of despair. And white pill, I define that as everything is gonna be okay, and that's just not, to me, that's not like empty. You're just being positive for no reason. That's, for me, that's the realization. No, God's under control. He has the final say. Even if I were to drop dead tomorrow, I'm gonna be okay. So I don't need to worry about anything.
So where are you on that spectrum?
I'm definitely white pilled.
Good. And that's one of the questions that I was going to ask you is, you know, with all of this alarmism that we see going on with, you know, the secular atheists, climate change, the epidemic of racism, all the things. I guess 3 years ago, would you have been as alarmed as they're trying to make everyone be? And do you still think that some of these things are a threat today, but you do so under the guise of God's got it under control? I totally butchered that question, but, you know, I do see a lot of Christians who completely say, well, climate change, all these things are bogus because of who's saying it. Then I see, you know, Christians saying, yeah, climate change is a threat. Yeah, racism is a threat, but God's got it under control. Like, where do you stand?
Yeah, so just to clarify, before I knew Christ, I was bugging out about everything. Like, I was on the Trump derangement train. I thought, like, oh, we're electing a racist. All the black people are just going to get back in shackles. COVID happened, and I'm like, oh, everyone's going to drop dead because of this thing. Like, I literally thought we were all going to die. So I can relate to people, you know, and I see it, it's very common with atheists, is I can relate to some extent of how they truly believe if we don't act now, everyone's going to die. And it's because they're not looking past death. They just look at death as like the ultimate final stage, and there's nothing beyond that. And I have sympathy for these people. I really do. Now, in terms of, okay, well, God's got us, I think it is also important to know what is in our control and know what is not in our control. And if there is something that it is in our control and we can do something now, I think it's important to also still be following the guidelines established by God to make sure that I think, what's the phrase? It's like the ends justify the means. You don't want to totally disregard God's word and his laws just for achieving a certain goal. Like, I don't think, you know, reducing carbon emissions and taking care of climate change should come at the expense of oppressing people and tormenting them. You know what I mean? Like that, then you're creating another problem in the process. So I think people, while it's good to have that mindset of, yeah, we should be addressing these things, you also have to think of it beyond stage one. What are my actions going to do to the bigger picture? Am I actually creating bigger problems?
That's good.
You know, Chad, if I may, it's not so much a question, but just listening to Gothics made me think about something. You know, you're talking about climate change and whether it was the whole COVID fiasco. Sort of like what Gothics just alluded to, you know, there has to be something transcendent, right, beyond material, you know, because, you know, without it's easy, because I think what she was saying was that, you know, if you feel as though, well, this is all there is, you know, what depths would you stoop to in order to try and, I guess, keep this life? But when you recognize and realize that there is something beyond the physical, that is the true source of your strength, because it instills you with this idea that there is something worth dying for, because you know that this isn't it. And once you realize that, you know, I mean, to me, I mean, we as believers, I think that is ultimately the source of our strength, because when they can no longer frighten you with the prospect of death, quite frankly, it makes you unstoppable. So just want to put that out there because that's what it resonated with me listening to her say that.
Yeah, that's good. I wanted to share with you all this clip from this podcast. It's a New York Times podcast that I came across. Actually, somebody shared it with me, and I thought it was very interesting because it was very reminiscent of this age-old attempt to remove God from the equation as it relates to social organizing. And I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on this. Stand by.
Theologians hundreds of years ago were trying to make sense of what is it that's special about human beings and what is it that will survive beyond what we can see happening, which is the decay of the body into nothingness. There's this spiritual part of us, there's this soul that survives, and it's the soul that gives our life meaning. It's the soul that makes human beings special, and it's the soul thereby that justifies what we do in the world. Now, once you get the emergence of secular humanism, there's this real need to retain that separation, that moral separation between us and the rest of the living world, because we want to continue exploiting other animals, for example, or we might simply want the psychological relief and the moral relief of seeing ourselves as this superior form of life. And the solution comes in with secular humanism to sort of transport the soul, which is a whole body dualism, into the idea of our minds, into the idea of our superior cognition, our rationality, our free will. And that kind of little trick, that little move starts happening during the Enlightenment as the kind of seeds of humanism are being sown, and we have the emergence of an empirical scientific worldview, which put those thinkers sometimes in tension with this kind of religious dualism. Now, we're living in an interesting time now, of course, because we have learned much more about the intelligence and sentiency and cognitive skills of other living beings, particularly primates, but also broadly mammals across birds and increasingly cephalopods that are challenging these ideas that it's only human beings who have this absolutely unique form of cognition. So just as Darwinism posed a problem for the old religious dualism and this sort of satisfying solution to being animal that provided, now we find that modern science, ironically, is provoking challenges to the alternative secular solution to being animal, which was kind of cognitive dualism.
I see a lot of talk like this where you have now emerging this whole concept of, since we are animals, that must prompt us to, in a sense, rejigger society, rejigger the system to accommodate our animalism, so to speak, which is very interesting, especially in a time where, you know, you have an advancement of technology, of artificial intelligence and all these things. This should be a testament to the fact that man is set apart. Man is not animal. Man is something different. That should, in a sense, validate what Genesis says about who we are and how God has made us. But the reality is, the secular humanists, well, she doesn't consider herself a secular humanist because she thinks that secular humanists are too religious for her. She believes that we are animals and we must really dig in and lean into our animalism. What were your guys' thoughts of this?
I mean, whenever I see videos like that, it makes me so sad because humans are generally stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, at least with animals, if you look at animals, from what I can see, animals are programmed to do what they are supposed to do. You hunt for food, you feed your babies, you take care of them, you die. You build shelter in the process. So, it's just rinse and repeat, and they're doing what they're supposed to do. Whereas us human beings, we seem to think that we have all of the knowledge and wisdom and authority over how we're supposed to live, and we do things our way, and we have so much historical examples to show that when we do it our way, we mess things up. And so to think that we have a generation of people that are making science their god, it's like, have we not learned our lesson?
Right.
Yeah. Well, see, what I think of It's interesting when I listen to Gothics when she says that, she sort of made her way into the Christian faith when she really began to study communism, and she sort of put two and two together. She said, well, hey, here's what these people believe. This is the world they create when things are left in their hands. So something's not gelling. Something's not adding up, because, one can, I guess, see that, okay, this is bad, right? Over 100 million corpses throughout the course of the 20th century. Okay, something is bad. Okay, when you go back to the beginning stages of communism, when you truly understand Marx and Engels, just like the lady said, just like Gothic just said when she explained pretty much, sort of like the basic, fundamental behavioral patterns of your average animal, we are no different, essentially. This is the argument that Engels would make, Marx would make. Marx simply turned man's focus upside down, and that human beings are on the same exact quest as animals for food and shelter, warmth, sexual gratification, and so on and so forth. And what he referred to things like religion, for example, and our basic sort of common conceptions of morality, wherever they may derive, are simply is simply ideological overgrowth. Okay, so you must dumb the society down to get to what man is essentially after, which is, of course, material comfort. How we define ideology is simply a mechanism by which we as human beings give justification to how those material resources are allocated, right? And so Marx starts from a totally different premise and then works his way back to here. So everything else downstream from material acquisition is simply superfluous. According to him, this is his mind. And so, like you said, Chad, you said that she said that the secular humanists were a bit too religious for her. And when you go back to the particular period of the Enlightenment, we think of men like Locke, Adam Smith, and Kant, and many of these individuals, even Rousseau, even a man like Rousseau. It's funny when you look at the two diverging perspectives of the American Revolution and the French Revolution. Both revolutions were inspired by the Enlightenment, but one particular revolution, that being the American Revolution, stayed more so in line with the faith tradition of the West, whereas the French simply abandoned it.
Yeah, and you had Voltaire, who was trying to, in a sense, throw away God, whereas Thomas Jefferson leaned into the moral ethics of the biblical faith. So
and so there's a difference. And
do you want to add anything to that, Gothics? Or
no, I think everything you said was spot on. I wouldn't add anything else.
Separating ourselves from being animal in many different ways has solved the moral problem that we might face. We often fall back on this idea, well, human beings are the only ones with moral worth, and we have our moral worth, which is grounded in our particular capacities, the fact that we are incredibly intelligent, that we are rational, that we live in a cultural world, that we're symbolic thinkers, and so forth. So we have ordered our whole system of justification around our intelligence. Now, one can speculate on what's going to happen when we find that we are confronted by a non-animal system, but that has superior capacities, superior forms of rationality than us. Because, human beings are not, in fact, brilliantly rational. We're very biased. Our memories are imperfect. So human beings are, because we're animals, we're flawed in our intelligence. Yes, we are highly intelligent and interesting abstract thinkers and cultural thinkers, for sure. But we're still animals. It's still an animal intelligence. It's flawed. It does a good job. It never does a perfect job, because evolution doesn't work that way. It does a good job. But what if we end up with this synthetic intelligence that we've generated that can outthink us, outsmart us, is more rational and is more reasonable? Will we then need to flip into a new system of justification that actually leans back into our animality? So we start to look at genetic technologies, synthetic biology, AI, these are all actually exploiting the physical stuff of a living being. And what I try to argue is that the more we want to escape being animal and the worse that separation becomes, it doesn't resolve the anxiety, it heightens it. What might follow from the fact that our new technologies are all about the fact that we're animal? They confront us with being animal all the time. They are about our physical being. If that's what we find threatening, I'm not convinced we're going to be well placed until we accept that and talk about that to actually steer these kinds of technologies.
So what the hell is she saying?
I'm sitting there confused because she's making all these claims, these matter-of-fact claims, it would seem to me, but she never really explains how the evolution of modern technology is making man come to the realization, ever more so, that he is in fact an animal. I didn't really, maybe she lands that plane further down in her little speech there, but I just couldn't help but smile. I don't know if this dawned on you all when she posed the question, what happens when we run into a superior intelligence? And I just said, ma'am, maybe there was this guy this one time, he was crucified and laid to rest. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, it's called God, man. But again, she's, it's obvious that she's serving a totally separate God. And I wanted to just harken back on something she said too when she talked about Darwin and how, Darwin's theory pretty much just laid waste to a lot of our traditionally held religious beliefs. This goes all the way back to the Copernican revolution, and I believe it was Copernicus, you all correct me if I'm wrong, who discovered that the Earth revolved around the sun as opposed to vice versa, right? The whole heliocentric model versus the geocentric model. And this really shook up the church back then, both Protestant and Catholic churches. As a matter of fact, the Protestant church was more vehemently opposed to Copernicus than even the Catholic church was, because at the time the Catholic church was, anyway, I don't want to go off the tracks too much, but yeah. So long ago, there's began this shift to say, well, maybe man just isn't that important within the grand scheme of things, and I don't think it began with Darwin. For me, the case can be made, the argument can be made that it began with Copernicus, but I just want to put that out there. But yeah, I just cracked up laughing. So what do you mean? What's going to happen when we're confronted with the superior intelligence? We already have been, man. It's called God. But anyway.
Yeah, I do find that interesting that she totally glosses over that. It's not God. It's not that intelligence. No.
Right.
But what she said was interesting, though. So if people are basing their morality or their whole foundation of life on the fact that human beings are intelligent, then what happens when AI comes along? There's lots of talks of people losing their jobs because AI is going to take over. So that basically means that AI would be your God. All of this technology would be your God. To me, that is so shallow and empty, and still there's no purpose in that.
Right.
Yeah, none at all. None at all. Again, this whole concept of, we are animals, and she she ties our our ability or inability to remember everything, and our the fact that we make mistakes, and we're prone to make mistakes, we're prone to wander, as the old hymn says, makes us animal. But the fact of the matter is, again, the Bible, to Chuck's point, has an answer for the fact that we are fallen creatures. And that is, again, found in Genesis. Everything that these people struggle with, these atheists, these humanists, these secularists, is found in Genesis. And the thing is, like, I'm not assuming a posture of bashing them. It's just, in a sense, very sad to me that they are spinning their wheels, trying to convince themselves that God doesn't exist, that we're that we're lower than what He has called us to be, that we're lower than what He has made us, and as such, we must, in a sense, again, rejigger the world to to fit this kind of utopia that we're trying to build. So this is very fascinating to me. I got one more clip from this podcast that I thought was interesting that I wanted to share with you all, and then we'll get right into a broader conversation.
We are animals as we embrace, and as our bloodied newborns slide from the bodies of women, but not when we make vows. We are animals as we bite into the flesh of our meal, but not in the workplace. We are animals on the operating table, but not when we speak of justice. And that felt true to me. And it made me wonder if really the whole thing we're talking about here isn't simply a mind-body distinction, right? We are animals when we are feeling, when we're running, when we're bleeding, when we're eating, when we're defecating, and we're not when we're podcasting. Right now, we're higher order beings dancing about in the world of ideas. One of the byproducts of consciousness is just a separation, not even from animals, but actually from bodies. It isn't just that when I am podcasting, I don't feel like I'm an animal. When I'm podcasting, I don't feel like I'm synthesizing protein inside myself. There is a deep separation when you are more and more in your mind.
You say, okay, we're not animals as we podcast, but actually, you know, my heart rate goes up a little bit. I feel a little bit nervous. I'm worried about not saying the wrong thing. That will probably mean I've got cortisol levels that are peaking right now. So everything about this whole podcasting is going to be really, really animal. And that's derived from the fact that we are these social animals where our social interactions and our status within society has a high premium. So that's why we get so nervous and our mouths get dry and we worry about what we're doing. That all comes from being animal. And yet the fact that we can think about it and contemplate it creates this strange disruption between what is still a completely animal phenomenon and the way that we actually then relate to it and think about it. And it does come from that kind of weird aspect of our cognition that's where I think it derives from.
You know, I heard them bring up their consciousness a lot in that clip. And what's interesting to me is again, I think for anyone, if you don't believe in God, you still have this void that you're looking to fill with something. And so for a lot of people, they sort of rely on their own ability to use reason and their mind and their conscience and all of that stuff. But without God, I would be curious to know how these people can even justify where your consciousness comes from, right? There has to be an intelligent design that blessed you with the ability to reason and think things through and even have that podcast discussion. Because otherwise, if it's just randomized, then why are we even listening to these people?
Right. 100%. Hold on, let me try to bring everybody back up. Boom. Okay. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's interesting, though, because what they're saying, I believe, is a kind of next step in this whole kind of global domination. Chuck mentioned the Enlightenment and the French Enlightenment. Again, Voltaire, he wanted to, in a sense, put God to bed when it came to reasoning in the public square, and he wanted to consider first and foremost the sciences and the arts. He wanted that to kind of drive civilization, so to speak. Whenever Jean-Jacques Rousseau was asked to write an essay over whether or not the arts and the sciences had did a good job in terms of reforming civilization for the better, his answer was no. That in fact, the kind of secularism of society has made men more effeminate, have, in a sense, decayed morals. And he says this is not only true of the French Enlightenment, but it's been true throughout history. It's been true in Egypt. It's been true in Greece. It's been true in, anywhere that you had an empire. to the extent that their kind of upper echelon of philosophers and thinkers had leaned into the arts and the sciences and have rejected God, the moral decay of society has ensued as a result. So that's very interesting that Jean-Jacques Rousseau would make such a point. And so again, you had the French Enlightenment, which in a sense was the Western Enlightenment. From there, you move into the 20th century. Actually, I'm sorry, the 19th century, where you have the publication of what am I trying to say? The Communist Manifesto, Das Kapital, and On the Origin of Species, Darwin. And this is, in a sense, moving man. Like, if it's true that, you know, we mustn't consider theology and we mustn't consider God when it comes to reasoning and civilization, the next step, the next obvious step is to, you know, in the name of science, figure out where we come from, where all this started. And then the answer we come up with is that we started off in the ocean. We ultimately evolved into another species, a kind of primate, and then we ultimately evolved into a conscious kind of evolved human being. And then for me, it's like moving from the 19th century kind of sciences and then into the 21st century where we are now. It seems like the next kind of level, the next rung on the ladder, as it were, is to again lean into our animalism, to reject God all the more, and this pursuit of building this kind of Tower of Babel-esque utopia. And these ideas, though we can poke fun at them right now because this is just a one-off podcast that those two individuals were on, it is my sense, just based upon the pattern of what we've seen over the past 400 years, is that within the space of 15 years, you'll have this kind of, you'll have schools actively teaching children that we are in fact animals. And the reason I can say that definitively is because the groundwork has already been laid for, you know, to teach such a thing. So we can only go off of precedents. And the question then becomes, what is the psychology of tomorrow's adult generation when the basis which undergirds the way they see the world is that we are animals? We're not what God say we are. We are animals. What's the, you know what I mean? What will be the morality? What will be how, you know, people identify? What will be the ethics of a generation of people who believe they're animals, you know? So
yeah, I mean, you kind of already see it where people say, like, you know, if whatever argument you can think of, but you usually hear something like, well, I was born this way, and they're using that to justify a particular behavior. And it's like, well, that to me sounds like I am an animal. This is my animalistic instinct. And therefore I'm just acting out what I was programmed to do. So yeah, I already see it. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
If you notice in that clip, and let me back up for a second, because I just want to kind of briefly, and this person may come up. I like the way Chad kind of exposed that aspect of Rousseau's thinking, because J.J. Rousseau is a man who, you know, gets mentioned when folks, you know, break down the modern left and they trace, you know, they go through Marx and they move on to Hegel and then to Rousseau and you know, perhaps some others in the midst of all of that. But I'm glad you exposed that, because even I know Chad may not remember, but we spoke about the French Revolution before, you know, and I even said that there were some good things, there were some good ideas present there, especially when it came to Rousseau, even though he's sort of smeared. I'm not fair to say smeared, but, you know, he's kind of categorized broadly as a man who was sort of like this wackadoo, who kind of got the ball rolling for a lot of this nonsense. But I don't know if that's entirely fair when you talk about Rousseau and by extension Hegel as well. There were two distinct lines of Hegelian thinkers, right? You had the left-wing Hegelians, you had the right-wing Hegelians, particularly when it came to, you know, the time of Karl Marx during his years in college in the 1830s primarily. Marx fell in with a group of Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel enthusiasts known as the Young Hegelians, where he would meet a young man by the name of Bruno Bauer, who would do a lot to shape Karl Marx's worldview. But when it came to Hegel, in terms of what Marx was able to take from Hegel, Marx took this understanding that the material world developed in this kind of, we think about conflict or what we call dialectics. When we think about Marx, Marx pretty much saw matter as the byproduct or the end result of motion. Even when you go all the way back to the ancient Greeks were constantly trying to get to what was the root cause of the universe's initial motion, what sort of gave it that first push, what sort of intelligence, or what was it exactly that was sort of governing the universe. And Marx would sort of build upon this because Marx was also heavily influenced by Epicureanism, that particular line of thinking. And so to Marx, all things that come into conflict inevitably make new things. Mm-hmm. And so this was Marx's attitude and understanding. This is the whole thing about dialectics and conflict. Out of that conflict birthed something new. And so the same thing is true when it comes to matter. This is how he, viewed the cosmos. And so man is simply a cosmic accident, in that due to his higher level of consciousness, he was able to develop what Marx would refer to as mind, to have a presence of mind to recognize what you are as a human being. Therefore, you find yourself in the unique position as a human being to be the one to recognize how the universe moves. Thus, you recognize and realize how history moves. So you must take it upon yourself to bypass man's struggles so that we reach the end of this historical cycle, or so this develop, not so much a cycle, but that time moved in a linear fashion so that we would reach this inevitable end of history. And so it was all just this sort of accident. So I bring all that up to say that when I listened to the woman, she talked about consciousness, and this was key to Marx and in all forms of left-wing thought, whether we're talking about orthodox classical Marxism, fast forward down through to the 60s with the rise of quote-unquote second wave feminism and the consciousness raising and the things that they were into back then in the 1960s. She talked about having these physiological responses, being on a podcast, elevated heart rate, and these things. And I laughed. What did she say? What did she say about their elevated status, their importance, which kind of made her nervous? She didn't want to say the wrong thing because of their elevated statuses or whatever. But no, she said something that was key, and this is key to Marxian thought, is that there are two kind of phenomena when it comes to this concept of consciousness. And the first thing is being conscious of any one given thing, or just say in this case a feeling. And the second move when it comes to this, I guess, true awakening, coming into true consciousness, is to be able to have an idea regarding what that thing means. So your consciousness of it, and then you are conscious of the implications of that thing. And then, of course, that leads into the Freudian aspect of Marxian thought moving into the 20th century. So, according to Marx, to be conscious is to be conscious that as a human being, you have the ability to create, which
so
in essence.
So what does all that mean for where we are now?
It means that, we as human beings are we are like the centerpiece of our own individual universes. You get what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And that to become conscious is to awaken to the fact that when you recognize God, should I say, what you then recognize in God is that God is the product of your own creation, or else you couldn't recognize God as such, because man is the creator himself. See, it's weird because you get into the weird kind of minutia of, this whole thing, and these weird, strange ideas that, a lot of people, I don't know if they're quite ready to deal with, and not to sort of talk down to anyone, but perhaps that a lot of folks aren't even prepared to deal with, because they, mentally, they may not be there, is unfortunately. So this is the uphill battle that we face.
I do believe
so,
that. I do believe that a lot of people who are listening to us now have the capacity to understand everything that you said. But if I may try to put it more simply, I feel that when you look at all these philosophies that have, transpired over the last 400 years, the reality is that the modern man has been given permission to indulge and to see himself as less than what he is, while at the same time seeing himself as greater than what he actually is. And it's this kind of weird, ironic. It's this weird kind of dichotomy in which we find ourselves. And so to the extent that those of us are born again and we're tasked with a great commission to go to the ends of the earth and preach the gospel and baptize people in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, what we're having to contend with is, again, hundreds of years of hollow and deceptive philosophies which have made man comfortable in his own vice and his own sin. And to me, having a story that's somewhat similar to Gothics's, that made my born again experience all the more richer. And it was very easy for me to, in a sense, turn my back on everything that I've been taught up until that point in my life, and to undergo this kind of radical shift. And, I think of, for example, the verse in the Bible where Jesus is saying, like, if you don't hate your mother, hate your father, hate this person, hate that person, you're not worthy of being my disciple. At first, because I grew up in church, that didn't make sense to me. But it made so much sense to me whenever I was born again, whenever everything kind of came to a head. The fact of the matter is, we have to love God more than the expert class of our day and the ancient philosophers of old. We have to love God more, and we have to adhere and take heed to his authority, even with all the permissions and the licenses we've been granted to indulge in self. What say you, Gothics?
I mean, I don't think I could add to that. I agree. Yeah. I can't add to it.
Yeah, that was excellent, man. That was excellent. And I'm sorry, guys, if my last little kind of diatribe there didn't make much sense. It's just kind of difficult because, again, you all know the kinds of subject matter and the things that we're dealing with. And, it's just sometimes it gets a bit difficult to kind of piece it all together in a way that actually makes sense in a short amount of time. So I hope you guys picked up what I was putting down there.
No, I definitely did. And I think a lot of people do. But again, I just wanted to kind of drive it home in terms of where we are today. If somebody had asked,
you guys are here for me anyway, man. We got the great Gothic here today. So
somebody had asked about a book recommendation, I guess, off of what I was just talking about with regard to Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Voltaire. This is the essay that I was referring to. I don't know if you guys can see it. That is Discourse on Arts and Sciences, written in 1750 by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. You can find that on, I think, William and Mary College website, among other places. So, Gothics, when you look at kind of, and I think I asked this question another way earlier, but what do you think are some of the implications of secularism and the assistance upon secularism by, I guess, the robes of society, be they academia, be they even a lot of churches, go figure. What do you think the implications of that are on, I guess, individuals in society?
So think I'm having a brain fart right now. I'm still waking up.
I can ask that another way if you'd like.
Ask it another way. Yeah.
Okay. So, like, do you think there are some benefits to secularism in the West? Like, do you like this all out kind of trend away from God that we call secularism? Do you think that there are some benefits to it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Maybe adopt, like, for believers to sort of, in the name of sharing the gospel, I think it's important to get on their level if they don't believe in God. I think that it's beneficial in that aspect. But as far as like secularism as a whole, like, I just don't see the purpose of it. Because I think what it comes down to is you're going to have a society of people that are doing completely different things and basing their entire worldview off of something, some artificial version of God, usually the science, usually some authority figure in a position of power that they can say, this is who I get all of my information and my truth and my morality from. And that's just a mess.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like and this isn't to say, just to be clear, like, this isn't to say that, you know, what I mean by this is God has to be the focal point of every single conversation in society. But I think that if you still aren't anchored by the terms that God establishes, it's a mess. And also, like, I'll add to this, because I get this a lot, is when people say, well, I can be a good person, I can live my life fine without knowing God. It's like, yeah, I have no doubt in my mind that you can be a good person. The problem is that you have no justification for it. So if you take your worldview and you multiply that by millions, you have millions of different people that are doing their own thing. Who's to say who's right and who's wrong?
Right. And that's the dilemma that these people find themselves in, which is interesting because, I mean, the whole basis of that, or the whole premise, I should say, of that podcast was, you know, yes, we're animals, but we can be ethical animals. And the question then becomes, well, what is the basis of your ethics? What, you know, where do you get a kind of objective moral code if you are at the same time succumbing to this narrative that we're nothing more than stardust? You know what I'm saying? Like, well, make it make sense. And I don't know that they can.
They can't. There is no, and I mean that, you know, not to ridicule anyone, because I would love to see everyone come to Christ. That is what I want. Mm-hmm. But like, I have yet to have a conversation with someone that's on the opposite side that doesn't have that has an argument that actually makes sense. I think with what you just asked, to which standard are they basing their worldview and the morality on? It all comes down to human opinion, if not your opinion personally, the opinions of other people in your life. And again, who's to say that that's the correct standard?
Right. And that's the thing is, you know, when I read Walter Lippmann, who wrote the book Public Opinion, among other books, he was a presidential advisor. His whole thesis was that most people are basically bland, are basically serfs, so to speak. He didn't say it as kind of bluntly as that. He said it in a bit more romantic way. However, there are ever so often individuals who are competent, and it is these competent ones who must make up the expert class, and it is these who must be the kind of gods of society, as it were. And so we must all, in a sense, trust their arbitration on all matters. And so he believed in this kind of upper echelon elitism that drives society. And the reason why he's wrong, to Rousseau's point, is because every time we've seen this kind of thing play out in society, it has led to the calamity of that particular nation. It has led to famine. It has led to wars. It has led to depressions and so on and so forth. And so even in America in itself, every time we have, yielded to the quote unquote expert class, the social engineers among us. It hasn't bowled over well for us as a society. And I think, to play the devil's advocate for a moment, I think that critics to what I'm saying would say, well, on the flip side of that, you have a theocracy, and nothing oppresses people more than a theocracy. Like, Gothics, do you believe that the opposite of secularism is a theocracy? What say you?
First, you got to define what theocracy is. I don't know what that is.
A theocracy being a government that recognizes a religion and uses that religion to rule and dominate a people. So, for example, the not the Roman Empire, the European, I guess, empire, the English Empire would have been a theocracy to the extent that they recognized the papacy and the Catholic Church had a say in law and how people. It was mandatory that you go to church on Sundays, that you pay taxes to the church, things of this nature. There are people who will listen to what we're saying in our critique of secularism and say, well, for all of the warts and bruises that secularism has, it's at least better than a theocracy. It's at least better than the church ruling over us.
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, from what you just described, a civilization that's governed by this idea that some examples you gave, you have to go to church, you have to pay to the church, you have to perform these religious duties. I think that that's going to create sort of like this cultured, this artificial version of being believers, which I don't think that works anyway. I think you get like a superficial version of that, and then it's sort of like it's not grounded in anything. So if someone is like following their government in this aspect, who's to say that they're going to be consistent in their moral worldview when the government isn't looking? It's not really going to address that on a deeper level. So, but I will say, and I mentioned this earlier, is that all laws are imposed morality. Mm-hmm. So commonly I'll hear people that if they're atheistic, they don't want Christians in office because they think that Christians are going to impose the morality on the rest of the world. Well, someone, regardless of what worldview you follow, is going to impose their morality on the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. And from my perspective, if it's between secularism and people that follow a particular belief, you can critique the belief, okay? Because there's some religions that I would not want to be governing the entire population, right. And that's a different conversation. But at minimum, there's at least consistency there. Whereas with secularism, it's you are your own God, and your morality is based on what the experts tell you, and I don't trust the experts.
Right. I don't trust the experts either. And, as far as, because I will vote for the politician who recognizes and takes heed to God's instruction over the atheist. And the reason for that is because I want for that man's Christian faith to inform the decisions that he makes in office. If he's in Congress, I want for his Christian faith to inform his support of a bill, his voting of a bill, his rejection of a bill. If he's president, again, I want for it to inform his vision for the country. If he's in the Supreme Court, I want it for it to inform his, the decisions or the opinions and the dissents that he makes. I want for, again, the recognition of God's word as inerrant to be present in the minds and the thoughts and the feelings of our leaders. And the reason for that is because, when you read the Bible, it's clear that God is a God of common grace. The Bible says that God allows the rain to fall on the wicked as well as the righteous, and he allows the sun to rise on the just as well as the unjust. And so, and not only that, we see where Jesus said, he acknowledges the fact that a tower fell on some people, and he said, "Did you think that those people's sins were greater than yours? No, unless you repent, you will likewise perish." And so this acknowledgement of the fact that, we all, I guess, are going to undergo the same fate as we live and we die, and how we lived on this earth will determine, and whether we repented or not will determine our eternal fate. But while we're here on earth, we have the same access to shelter, to food, to water given to us by the heavens, because God doesn't discriminate in terms of whether you believe in him or not, in giving you your daily bread and giving you, your necessities and your provisions. And so I'd rather somebody who acknowledges the biblical Christian faith to be in office than someone like a Muslim whose faith tells them to kill the infidels. You know what I mean? And of course, some would say that that's a radical, extreme interpretation of Islam, but it's in the Quran. So what do you do with that information? So,
Right.
Somebody, Chuck, did you have anything you wanted to say before? I
Yeah,
get to this
yeah,
catch
just
up?
letting you, yeah, I was just letting you guys, yeah, I was letting you guys flesh that out. I was sitting here taking notes on some things you guys were saying. Just simply asking the question, well, what do you base your morality on? Well, Lenin was clear on this. So was Marx and the rest. What defines their morality is what is in the best interest of the class. And the problem with that is, and again, this is explicitly written, this is explicitly spoken, again, by Lenin and Marx and other ilk of their day who, believed in this trash doctrine. The problem with that is that when you're constantly, looking for new victims, because if conflict is what creates the synthesis, well, then you have to constantly provoke. And this is the thing that, sort of made Leninism, I guess, its own distinct brand of Marxism, because they came to the realization that things were not going to trek along organically as Marx had predicted. Because remember that communism was supposed to come about in the way of a certain wave of economic developments. And we saw that, when it came to the Soviet Union in 1917, they were nothing close to a kind of developed, high-powered Western economy like, the United States and some of these other countries. And so the bringing forth of this communist utopia was about, again, one who's conscious as a member of the revolutionary class to then take it upon themselves to deliberately agitate in order to cause conflict so that we can bring about a new. And so whenever society seems as though it is on the brink of stabilization or stabilizing itself, it must be completely rattled and shaken again until there are no more oppressed classes left. So the center is always searching for new margins. And this is why, we are in the state that we're in today, where it's like, okay, well, a couple of years ago, if you go back to the days of men like Harry Hay in the 1960s and the 1970s, even though Harry Hay himself was into some very weird things, but now it's sort of like all, it's out in the open, where it's like, okay, gays just wanted to get married, and now we have adult men, naked twerking in front of young kids. And so this is where the movement is today, because the center has to constantly look for new margins. Chad brought up something. He posed a question about the theocracy, and I look at secularism as this runaway train that has betrayed its master. And I've said this before, because a lot of secular ideas were the creations of religious thought. And without that faith, I kind of look at it as the same exact way that Augustine looked at it, where it was like he was so dogmatic in his Christian faith that he suggested that all things of intellectual significance be filtered through the prism of the Christian doctrine. And that's the way I look at it. And I think Augustine was right when he put that forth. And as time went on, we kind of moved further and further away from that. But again, I think too that there's a difference between, say, for example, and Chad brought up the English Empire or the British Empire, as it would become later when it would incorporate Scotland. But there was a difference between the Protestant worldview and the Catholic worldview. And that may be, again, a totally separate conversation, because, you know, when you look at the differences between Protestantism and Catholicism and how it all kind of blends when we start talking about this encroachment of secularism, or the encroachment of Marxism, you know, given each, you know, difference between each, I guess, theologically, you know, you're talking about two totally separate phenomena. And so it gets a bit tricky, you know, and it does get a bit complicated. So just wanted to say that. I guess, Chad, you can go if you had some clips.
Yeah. No, I don't have any clips. I just wanted to get to the super chats. Thank you, James Anderson, for the super chat. He says, where is the established standard if we are all individually driven in our own morality? What reigns supreme? It's a good question. I think Gothics put forth a similar question earlier, but I will say what strikes me about this particular question is how reminiscent it is of Republican politics, namely of modern Republican politics, namely that you know, we all have to recognize and understand and, in a sense, worship individuality. And it's kind of like this libertarian understanding of politics that if we are all kind of left to our own devices, then the world will be a better place. Get the government completely out of the way, let everybody do what they want to do. And, you know, I agree with that to an extent, but at the same time, the Bible recognizes and reinforces the need for human beings to have government. And to the extent that we have government, the Bible says that the government doesn't wield the sword for no reason. It does so for a purpose, for peace and stability in the land. And so that government must necessarily have a recognized, unmovable code of ethics with which it reigns. And in the West, particularly here in America, because we do live in a constitutional republic, a government made up of representatives, that government is supposed to represent the ethos, the mores, the worldview of its people. And the government in America will be reflective of where we are as a people, consciously or unconsciously. And when I say consciously or unconsciously, I mean like where we, the people, stand. I think we are moving unconsciously right now. And we have made ourselves, in a sense, empty vessels to be poured out by our government. When the Bible says we're supposed to be empty vessels poured out by God, but I digress. And so the government, in a sense, uses our votes to solidify its power, to then do whatever the heck it wants to do, namely to help to assist in this kind of globalist agenda. That's what's going on right now. Let's not get it twisted. But to the extent that we have, quote unquote, good government, it's supposed to in a sense, represent our desire for a peaceful, well-structured, and stable society. And I feel like if we as Republicans, I'm not a Republican, but if Republicans continue to preach and teach this notion of individuality above all else, you can't at the same time argue against transgenderism and all the things, because this transgender person is just doing whatever the heck they want to do. Well, you know, you can't have your cake and eat it too, as it were. You have to recognize a principled code of ethics. And I think one of the byproducts of this all-out secularism is the fact that we become very kind of postmodern in the way that we see things. So what do you think of this concept of postmodernism? And I'll ask you that question, maybe one more, Vanessa, before we land the plane.
I'm not even sure what postmodernism is. Like, okay. I don't, what's that?
So
I just don't know the clear definition.
So you want to take a step at a definition, Chuck? And I think a lot of people don't know what postmodernism is. So it's just one of those things where
to put it simply, I'm gonna try to simplify it, I suppose.
I
Earlier,
don't even know what it is half the time. But go ahead.
it's difficult to know what it is because the men who are most synonymous with popularizing postmodernism in the West or in America more specifically, their writings are just extremely just convoluted and difficult
Nonsense.
it's just nonsense. So, there are two men who come to mind. That is, of course, Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida. And, pretty much postmodernism sort of began with this narrative or this literary sort of a critique, one that suggests that there are no grand narratives. Okay, so that's the best way I can sort of put it.
There's no objective morality. There's
no objective morality. Yeah. So it goes back to what you're saying. So essentially, things are only defined. Things are defined or understood relative to their functions as they relate to other things. It's like if you were to take a table, right? We all know what a table does. We know what a table is used for. But a table is only useful relative to its position towards other things in nature, like the floor, where you sit, where you position your chair, and so on and so forth. And so if you were to take the table and flip it upside down, you may still call it a table, but does it still function the same? It may not function the same, or it doesn't function the same because it's no longer in the position that it was in. So the table has taken on a different meaning because now, just for example, imagine if the table was conscious and had eyes, the table would have a totally different perspective because now it is seeing the outside world from a different point of view. And so nothing can be objectively understood because nothing is sort of statically, in a sense, defined. Because when you try to define things, and I'm going to end it here, when you try to define what something is, the only thing that you can direct a person toward is a word to describe what that thing is. And when you try to understand what the word that you use to describe what that thing is, the only thing you're going to be directed to from there is another set of words. And so what we're essentially caught up in is this sort of tangled web of words that really just go around and around ad nauseum, ad infinitum, without anything objective or anything standard by which to, make judgments.
Yeah.
And so, and the reason why I think Chad brought that up is because men like Foucault was, I don't think he was ever a member of the Communist Party. I don't think he ever considered himself to be a communist. But when you start to read Foucault's literature, it is indistinguishable. And just as an aside, it's important to know some of Michel Foucault. Again, he's probably still to this day the most quoted, the most cited, the most well-known postmodernist. He was a sexual deviant. I think he died of AIDS-related complications because of his sexually perverse activities. And this is something that is synonymous with a lot of left-wing thinkers, from Michel Foucault to Barack Obama's mentor, Frank Marshall Davis. The list goes on and on and on. And so they began to sort of pick up on what a lot of postmodernists were promoting because it helped them sort of facilitate their political aims. And by them, I mean, small c communists, or even, members of the Communist Party themselves, to sort of destabilize the West by eviscerating the very notion of truth. Mm-hmm. Sort of like what we've been saying this whole time.
Yeah. That sounds like a hot mess. All of that. What that sounds like to me is someone who's rejected God and says, you know what, I want to create a philosophy that complements my life and normalizes the things that I want to do instead of following a standard established by the creator. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. And that's why a lot of them sort of cling to the left. And when I say a lot of them cling to the left is, again, they saw the Communist Party as being sort of sensitive to their worldview when it came to their own private predilections. I can go on down the line and name these men who were either sympathizers, fellow travelers, or actually card-carrying members of the Communist Party who, again, used the fundamental tenets of Marxism to sort of justify their own perversions.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that postmodernism is where a lot of the things that we see happening in culture, postmodernism is the basic worldview that undergirds all these things, whether it's the belief in 46 different genders, whether it's the belief in one's quote-unquote own truth, that everything is fluid, everything is subjective. This is the basis of postmodernism. And again, I think it's where people are by default, just due to the kind of inundative way in which secularism and postmodernism is kind of instilled into us in the West from a very early age. And this is why the gospel is so radical to people to hear. People just don't know what to do with it. Like, what do you mean I'm a sinner? What is sin? You know what I mean? To even have a basic understanding of sin in the modern Western world, I think is huge, because I think that one of the things that have happened as a result of the demoralization of society, something that Yuri Bezmenov talks about in his 1984 interview with G. Edward Griffin. So one of the results of kind of mass demoralization is the fact that we have a collective seared conscience. And so when you're trying to share the gospel with someone, they can't understand their need for Christ if they don't first and foremost understand the fact that they are a sinner, that they have sinned before God, and so I guess, Gothics, that leads to my question for you. What was, because you did have a basic kind of understanding of right from wrong. I mean, you're not, like, you weren't completely gone, but what caused you to recognize your need for Christ?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I was completely, cray cray, but I did have a somewhat of an understanding of right and wrong. Again, no way to justify my positions on right and wrong. I just felt it. But as far as my need for Christ, it was when I was black pilled and I was seeing in real time just the left going crazy, and then seeing people on the right, just, it was like this back and forth. And I'm like, okay, well, how do you resolve this problem? It's like when people walk away from the left, now they're being accused of grifting, and now they're white supremacists and all this stuff. I don't see any opportunity here for people to actually resolve their problems. And I didn't believe that political action was going to fix it, especially after the 2020 election. I was talking to my husband before Biden got in office, and we both called it. We said, if this guy gets in, things are going to get way, way worse. Not saying that Trump is like the savior or anything, but we just saw it for what it was. And so really I was just in this state of despair, and I needed guidance beyond me going to a psychologist and smoking weed, because that wasn't working. I needed someone to help me understand the world and understand and discover hope. And what better way to understand the world than the Creator himself? And so that's really how it initially drew me in. And now it's like when I hear people complaining about, oh, this person did this crazy thing, they're doubling down on this. And it's like, yeah, I get it. You know why? It's because we are a fallen world and everybody sins. And the problem is that a lot of sin has been so normalized and ingrained in us that most people don't see the need for that divine moral authority, because to them that sin isn't that bad. It's totally fine.
Right.
And yeah, that's pretty much what happened to me.
That's actually like for me, like your coming to that realization was a lot faster than my coming to the same realization that politics can't fix it. The only thing that can fix it is change hearts, And it's interesting to see kind of the political kind of back and forth between Democrats and Republicans. And I actually think it's actually quite sad, because you see a lot of Republicans making fun of and critiquing the Democrats. And even on my post, like I'll post something nefarious that happened in history, and it never fails. People get into my comment section and say, the Democrats did this. This is because of the Democrats, the Democrats, the Democrats, the Democrats. And for me, like, I cringe when I see that in my comment section, is because, like, I guess it goes back to what you were saying in terms of, like, before being red pilled, people just genuinely believe that politics is Republican versus Democrat. And the reality is, no, it goes deeper than that. And the Bible tells us, once again, that, you know, our battle isn't against flesh and blood, and Republican and Democrat is flesh and blood. It's we have one way of looking at the world, they have another way of looking at the world, and we flesh it out and we duke it out in the voting booth. But the reality is, okay, let's say your guys get in office. Let's say that we get a Republican president, Republican Congress, Republican majority on the Supreme Court. Will we get this grand kind of utopia that Republicans want? The reality is no. You'll still have issues in the world, because you'll still have the sin of man. So long as man is in the world, you're going to have depravity, you're going to have decadence, you're going to have degeneracy. It just is what it is. Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, too. I think it speaks to what you guys are talking about. Even still, like, the whole idea and the whole concept, you know, we're talking about everybody's just sort of going their own way. It's weird, because, you know, at the same time, they abhor this kind of personal freedom. Chad was kind of leaning into libertarianism a little bit earlier. Again, you know, how do you make a moral case against things like, you know, whether you're talking drug usage or prostitution, abortion, things like assisted suicide. I think assisted suicide is a gateway to something far more nefarious. That's just my personal opinion. And when it comes to this, you know, the concept of freedom, right? You know, we all want to try and figure out a way to make our finite lives on this planet as bearable as we, you know, possibly can. And so we're just sort of trying to figure out how to do that. You know, people don't realize that, you know, aside from just your own, you know, individual wants and needs, you know, like when it comes to libertarians, this whole idea of self-governance, and so, or self-ownership, should I say. And because you sort of own yourself, by that extension, you have the right of external ownership. And so you can do whatever you want to do with your person, so long as you consent to it. And I don't think that makes for a good thing in the long run, because coupled with that must be one sense of obligation to the whole by appealing to, or should I say, living your life in a way that is in accordance with what you are obligated to do by way of moral command. Because before you just let man loose and tell him that just he can simply do whatever he wants, and I'm talking about libertarians now, I'm not even talking about the left. I know this conversation isn't about libertarians per se, because Chad has some work that he's going to be doing later on with that. But before you sort of set men out in the world, I think it's best that we get a clear-cut understanding on what is in man's heart, meaning that what pleases him, what sort of activities pleases him. Because what someone does in the privacy of their own homes or whatever, we hear even conservatives throw these phrases around, does inevitably have an effect on the lives of the people that exists within the context of the whole. So I don't think libertarianism is the long-term answer when it comes to that, because what comes along with the very concept of freedom is knowing and understanding that you do have obligations. And so you have to subdue certain passions, because what you can do, what you are allowed to do, isn't always what you ought to do. And so, you know, when it comes to this whole concept of truth and God and what is morally true and this and that, kind of going back to postmodernism a second, and I'll give the mic back. Just this one last point. What we consider to be truth, and this, again, Marx stressed this, and the postmodernists will go on to stress this later on, that there is no such thing as truth. Truth is only the expression of power. And that's what most postmodernists think, that the only thing that matters in the world is power. And so whatever we as human beings, or not just human beings in general, because, human beings are so diverse, so many different cultures and languages and places or whatever, or what have you, but what we consider to be true is merely meant to reinforce the values of the powerful so that the powerful can maintain the things that they have. And that is a scary, dangerous way to see the world. It just really is, because that is why so many people simply act out, because they see themselves as dispossessed. They see themselves as having no power. They're just small little cogs in the machine. And it is to the extent that they are asked to participate in life in a way that is in accordance with what is in fact moral. They've been conned into believing that they're simply justifying something that is inherently corrupt and immoral, because it is only using the semblance of truth to justify its own power.
Really quick, that's a self-defeating statement anyway. If someone says there is no truth, is that statement true? What you just said?
Right.
Well, see, right. That's the problem that postmodernists run into, and I don't think they can escape that trick bag they put themselves in. Because that's an axiom in and of itself. So how do you escape that?
Shout out to Jambalaya Talks for the super sticker. Really appreciate it. Looks like we got a question, Gothics. Let's see. Faith-based belief systems. I don't know if this is a question as much as it is a comment. Faith-based belief systems sound like a great way to have top-down control of populations. Perfect for hijacking by rogue governments based on unprovable claims of supernatural origin. Very dangerous. Okay, so I guess they're saying that it's dangerous to believe in God and to allow one's faith to inform their decisions while in elected office. Obviously, I disagree with that.
I think they meant, like they said, like faith-based systems. So perhaps they mean more so like the theocracy we were talking about, like theo meaning God, ocracy or Chrissy meaning form of control. So God-based like control. I think more so. Maybe, I don't know. I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they don't mean individuals having faith, but more so like a faith-based system where that's how the entire society is set up. They think that's dangerous. I don't know. What do you say to that, Chad?
Well,
I'm sorry, because I did cut you off. I'm sorry.
They clarify, say, to be clear, I greatly appreciate the work and words of Chad and Gothics minus faith-based belief position. Go ahead, Gothics.
Well, I don't believe, like as Chuck just said, like I don't believe in this sort of theocracy system where it's like, no, you must read your Bible, you must worship God, because I look at it from the perspective of God gives us the free will to choose anyway. And so that would essentially you just being forcing people to believe in something that they don't. That I disagree with. But in terms of people maintaining a certain type of faith in God in office, I don't see any. I think that's way better than having an atheistic government. So if the question is whose faith in God or whose God is actually legitimate, we can have that debate, because that, to me, that sounds like a generalized statement, like all religions are the same and no religion is truthful or better than the other. And so I think that opens up a different question. But you're going to get a top-down government, probably way more with the secularist government anyway.
Well, and not only that, I'll add this little nugget here. You're saying that Christianity is unprovable, therefore it has no business in government. So naturally, when you say that, you're asking us to trust in the atheist, worldview of man. To the extent that a politician comes along and says, look, if you vote for me, I'm going to build for you this grand utopian future. Based upon what? Why should I trust you? Who are you? You're asking me, in a sense, to trust this atheist individual who's going to build this grand utopia. And so for me, it's like everything comes down to belief. Every time you vote for a politician, regardless of where they stand on a particular issue, you're doing so based upon faith, based upon belief in something that they are claiming that they're going to do. And so for me, I have a Bible. I can read about what Christianity is about. I can read what God has done historically. I can read these things and make sense of it. It makes sense of Orthodox Christianity. And so if a politician says, look, I believe in God, and I'm running for this particular office to preserve and to maintain the constitutional republic, I'm more likely to vote for that person than the atheist whose system is predicated on a kind of Voltaire kind of nihilistic way of looking at the world, because that in itself is this kind of fluid, kind of subjective thing. I think somebody in the comment section said that postmodernism is the ethics of the now, the ethics of it's situational ethics. So it's this kind of utilitarian way of looking at the world where the ends justify the means. And so what is the means? Whether the means mean wiping people out, whether the means mean doing some kind of unethical thing, so long as it gives us the kind of end that the expert class says it will give us, that thing is good in itself. I don't know that I know for a fact that I don't trust that because it's unpredictable. Whereas if you're telling me that you believe in God, that gives me some kind of forethought into the kinds of decisions you'll make on a given matter. So I trust very much, I trust more, because I don't trust any politician, but I trust more the guy who says that they are a believer versus the one who says that they're a non-believer, because the believer, I think, is more predictable than the atheist who is not.
Yeah, and also just to piggyback off what you just said, when someone says that they're a believer, I'm more willing to trust them as well. But then I also have to observe their behavior, because the Bible says you'll recognize them by their fruits.
Right.
We got, for example, Mr. Joe Biden, who says, I believe in God. Meanwhile, trans rights matter.
Right.
Sir.
And same with Trump. Like, I don't believe Trump is a believer at all.
Yeah, I don't think he is either.
Yeah. So, anyway,
Yeah, can I
go ahead
before you?
Yeah.
Well, it's funny, man, listening to this and listening to just sort of toss these questions around. To me, it just validates why man needs a savior. I forgot who it was. You all may be familiar with this quote. I can't remember who it was. It says something to the effect, when they were describing the American system, republicanism. They said, simply put, it's the best amongst the bad ideas. It's the least bad idea amongst all the other bad ideas, because we're talking about, of course, you look at countries that are governed by atheism. Look at the former Soviet Union, and every other country that tried to sort of walk in his footsteps. Ever since the miracle of the sun predicted the coming forth of the Soviet Union, if you believe in the miracle at Fatima. But no matter what sort of system of government we're talking about, we always, as human beings, fall short. We always fall short of creating this system that is going to just satisfy everyone and be, perfect in every way. I think it really just reinforces this fact, because that not only do we need a savior, but we actually have one. Because no matter who you are, we all have an internal idea or concept of what we think is good. So the question becomes, where does this source? What is the source of this feeling, this yearning? Where in fact does it come from? And the fact that no matter who you are, no matter what you do or how you behave, no one individual aside from Christ can fulfill the law or did fulfill the law, to me, it just simply speaks to the fact in the debt was paid for your transgression on Christ's behalf. I think just speaks to how much we in fact need a savior, and that's just aside from politics, because we all yearn for this sort of return back to the Garden of Eden. You understand what I'm saying? And so, and that's what the source of all of this is, really, is just, man trying to find God once again. But, too many men are just simply on the wrong path. And I laugh listening to that, what Gothics was saying, because, Chad, I know you remember when people would come into your comment section talking about how many people, and I hear people who are like, have axes to grind against religion, particularly Christianity. It's funny. Islam doesn't get nearly as much smoke in the West, but people say things like wars. So many people, how many people have died in the name of religion and this and that. I remember somebody told Chad that, how Joseph Stalin studied theology and this and that, and they try to use that to justify, to try to say, well, in fact, Joseph Stalin was some staunch religious fanatic. It was quite ridiculous, but I just laughed at that because people always talk about how many people died in the name of religion, and just like Gothic hit the nail on the head, it's like, nah, buddy, far more people have died in the name of atheism than any other thing that you could ever imagine. Every Inquisition, you take the amount of lives that were lost in both world wars, combine them, then double them, you still won't have the amount of lives that were taken in communist regimes during quote unquote peacetime. And so that one always tickles me. But
yeah, that's a slogan. Because I hear, though, that's like a very common argument that I hear, and it's like, that's when you know that your worldview is founded on slogans instead of actually researching, because you can very easily see that as you said, with all of the world wars that have happened in history, not even close to killing in the name of religion. And even so, for the argument of, people kill in the name of God, show me where in the Bible it says go ahead and just kill innocent people. You're gonna have a hard time finding that. So it's like, okay, as I mentioned with like the whole Joe Biden and Trump using God for political action, it's like, all right, the logical outworkings of someone that is truly following Christ wouldn't lead to genocide anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And Chad, you made it a point too earlier when you spoke about Rousseau and his criticism of the arts, and how Voltaire was claiming that the arts would kind of bring man into this higher state of being, this consciousness where he can, sort of like replace God, this new rationality or new spirituality. I just wanted to just also note that Marx, for example, even, going back to the French Revolution, since we were talking about Voltaire, the bourgeois class, which was the middle class in France, that overthrew the monarchy. These men were predominantly into like the legal field, lawyers and what have you, but there were also poets and writers and artisans and musicians who were, again, feeding on the ideas of the Enlightenment and looking at their own personal lives, and they noticed a disconnect, an incongruence between their ideals that they gathered from the Enlightenment and how they sort of lived their lives. And so, you look at, the material abundance and the opulence of the Catholic Church in France at the time. It really did do a lot to shape at least at the time, the French and their views when it came to their faith. But a lot of these men were heavily into the arts, heavily into poetry. That was, of course, one of Karl Marx himself. One of his early obsessions or hobbies was, in fact, poetry and artistry. He was big into Goethe and other poets, and so I just thought I would mention that. It's crazy how that always works. And even today, when it comes to our entertainment class, You don't really get a lot of truthful, common sense things coming from people. And I think I heard Jordan Peterson say this too. And it's funny because I said it before I heard him say it, so maybe I do know something. That people with a very high creative IQ don't tend to kind of grasp the things that we're talking about because they're kind of naturally inclined to think outside the box, or at least think that they should in fact think outside the box, because it is up to them to shift mankind into this some sort of new paradigm, even if they don't quite know where we're going. So it's very dangerous.
If you want to support Gothix's new movie, you can do so by going to lore.tv, LOOR.tv. Lore is a relatively new platform, and the way that the streaming platform works, I think, is very innovative. So yeah, do go do that. I've enjoyed having Gothix, although I can ask her plenty more questions. I do want to be respectful of her time. So what's next for you, Gothix?
Man, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I just wake up every day and I'm like, I'm just going to go with the flow.
Right,
But
right.
no plans.
You doing any writing or anything like that?
No, the thing recently I've been doing is I've been putting out these little comedy segments on my channel called Revelation News, where I'm trying to fuse
Yeah, those are hilarious.
political discourse and the gospel together to make people laugh.
Yeah.
Because I've noticed the last couple of years of me making monologues about hot topic issues, it usually results in a lot of angry people. So I said, okay, you know what? I need to sprinkle some humor up in this, because people need to laugh.
But is it your fault if people get angry?
No, it's not. But
Yeah.
but see, my goal is to get people to actually think. And I think if you're past that stage where you just can't function to even consider a different perspective, then we both lose.
Yeah, I agree with that. At the same time, though, it's like when I look at the content that you've created that has resulted in people getting angry, I can't find anything that you said that is especially coming from a posture of a provocateur or is intentionally meant to ruffle people's feathers. And it's very reminiscent, in my opinion, of things that I see in as far as Jesus. Like, he would say things and people would want to literally kill him. You know, and it says that he had to escape the crowd to circumvent them having to lay hands upon him. The fact is that truth has this kind of angering effect. And I think the reason for that, for many people, is that they don't want to come face to face with, they don't want to be confronted by reality. And they want to continue living in this kind of like lie, or this, concocted reality. And it's very easy to tell people what they want to hear. I mean, when I look at a lot of these, podcasts that have millions of views, and when I look at the fact that someone like, for example, and I'm not trying to throw shade on anybody, but you look at people like Kim Kardashian and others. Like, Kim Kardashian has more followers on IG than there are people in America. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, how does that happen? Other than the fact that people, Joe Osteen, I think, is another example of that. Like, people gravitate to somebody who will tell them what their itching ears want to hear. If you really were a grifter, for example, then you would be riding this Trump train. You would be kind of preaching the gospel of Trump. Trump can't do any wrong. And I guarantee you that you will have a lot more, because, I mean, you're a natural. Like I was telling Graham, you have the it factor. Like, whatever you do is going to be successful because you have a good way of articulating your points very clear. You're entertaining, your common sense. When you make a point, you're very concise and clear. That's a very rare trait to have. That's something that I certainly don't have. I struggle to get through basic sentences. But if you were to utilize that or to employ that in the service of being on the quote unquote Trump train, I would venture to say that you would have access to this wide and vast kind of audience who will, make you feel like this huge celebrity. And you, rather than doing that, you're employing your skills, your talents, your gift to the service of Christ. And so to the extent, once again, that you say things that are true, that is coming from that place of wanting people to know the truth, people will get angry. Now, I do believe that God has given us the ability to be creative in how we deliver a message. And it may be true that helps to, in a sense, kind of cool down the otherwise hot-headed people in the audience, or you're kind of setting the tone to where, to the extent that a person does come to you to dissent or to disagree with what you're saying, they're doing so with the tone that you have already established. So I do think that there's something to say to that, but at the end of the day, people are just going to be angry because they don't want to face the truth.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was nice of you to say, by the way.
Yeah. You have any last words before we close it out?
No, nothing. This was a great conversation. It was nice meeting you, Chuck. It was good.
Yeah, nice to meet you too, man. Yeah, like I said, I've been checking you out for a while, so again, it was an honor sharing this panel, sharing the stage with you. Hopefully, we can do it again someday. I promise you guys, I'm not like holding Chad hostage, or I don't have any bad pictures of him or anything. I'm not blackmailing them. I know you guys are probably sick of seeing my face because I'm always here, kind of tagging along. No, I'm just joking. But yeah, man, thank you, Chad, for allowing me to crash the party, because it was kind of last minute. He just asked me to join in this morning. I said, man, talk to Gothics and be sure, man, absolutely. So thank you guys for inviting me, man, and thanks for everybody in the chat. And to the chat, don't worry, guys. AM1, they'll get there. He or she will get there. Just pray for them. They'll get there. Just give them time, give them grace. The door is open, AM1. Just come on in, man. You'll get there.
Thank you, Gothics, for blessing my channel with your presence. I think you're the biggest star I've had on here. So
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. No problem. Yeah. Anytime.
All right. Well, if you like pagan holidays, I hope you all go and enjoy the 4th of July. Other than that,
you're such a prude, Jay.
I want some hot dogs, okay?
I love y'all. Bye.
All right, peace out.